Hello and welcome to today's Career Crush Q&A. I'm Emily Aries, the founder and CEO of Bossed Up, where we help women navigate career transition and craft happy, healthy, and sustainable career paths. It is my great pleasure to be featuring today Lexs Schroeder here, who's with Take the Lead Women, an amazing organization that's striving for gender parity and leadership across the United States and beyond, and who I've had the great pleasure of joining at trainings and learning all about their incredible programs that they're doing at companies and organizations and all over the place to help women step into that role as the leaders that we all can be. Lexs, thanks so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So why don't we first just sort of give us the basics of what you're all about, how you became a speaker and writer and authority on women's leadership, and a little bit about the kind of work you do with Take the Lead.
Sure. So it's funny that you say, well, first of all, thank you for having me. A little background info. Emily and I met because we were on a panel, and it was one of those conversations that don't feel scripted. It was a very genuine, fabulous conversation. So it's always good to think with you, and I appreciate that ongoing thinking partnership sometimes. So let's see. It's funny that you said authority on women's leadership, because the reason I got involved in women's leadership work was because I really failed to recognize that I happened to be female. I didn't care about it much. It wasn't that interesting to me. I identify as a thinker and a writer and a strategist. And then and I went to a great college that treated me, like a brain and a person. And then I entered the working world, and really wonderful people with no bad intentions, showed me in the world, lots of different organizations, that that I was female. I happened to be female, and I kind of needed to be taken less seriously. It took me a long while to figure that out. But yeah, I got interested in women's leadership because women are people and they have great ideas, and that's about it.
I love it. I love it. And yes, you're right. I totally forget sometimes that we were both at that panel together at the Yale Women's Leadership Conference, which is an awesome venue for really inspiring, ambitious young ladies who are just entering the working world. And so what kind of work do you do now to help women at what stage in their careers, and what kinds of help do you really provide to help us step up into leadership?
Yeah, so Take the Lead is a nonprofit organization that partners with a lot of other organizations dedicated to women's leadership, but our stake in the ground is gender parity in leadership. That's women holding half of all top leadership positions across all sectors by 2025. The World Economic Forum predicts, I think it's around 2095 still, that if we keep going the rate that we're going, it's going to take that long to reach parity, right? So what we do, and what we're very proud to say that we do, is we focus not just on individual career advancement, which is really important, but not unlike Bossed Up, we also talk about collective women's advancement. And it's not just for the sake of women. Everybody benefits from organizations that have women in half of those top leadership and decision-making roles. We know that it's more financially viable, profitable. We know that teams are more creative and innovative, and the collective intelligence rises. We have the data. It's about, what do you do when you have the data and the research? What do you do next? So to answer your question, we do a lot of different things that Take the Lead, but one of the core areas that I'm involved in, beyond leading our internal staff team, is developing a training program that teaches 9 principles for change. Those tools were developed by our co-founder, Gloria Felt, learning from the front lines of leadership over many years. How to navigate change, how to advance your own career or your own goals in society while advancing others. She fought for women's reproductive health for many decades. And so those tools are everything from how to define your own terms to how to embrace controversy in a positive way. And we teach them with a group of 30 leadership ambassadors all over the country now that are really extraordinary people. And they go into organizations to teach that core curriculum.
That is awesome. Congratulations on all of the growth there, and that is such an amazing, I've had the chance to really see that kind of training that you're up to up close, and I can say it's really, really transformative and powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So I just want to take a moment here to cover one of the housekeeping things that usually come with Career Crush. So everyone who's tuning in, thank you so much for being here. Career Crush Q&As are all about basically showing behind the scenes of careers, or of women who have inspired me, whose careers I think are high impact and incredible in their own right. So we love to lead these conversations in a way that gives us a sense of where you come from, Lexs, and how you got to where you are today. and also opens up the door and possibility for those viewing, those tuning in, to figure out how they might want to navigate their career in a similar or different trajectory. So for everybody watching today, make sure you're using that Twitter feed. I'm tuned into Twitter throughout this conversation. I'll be like typing off on the side on occasion when Lex says something amazing that just has to be documented. And we're using the hashtag Career Crush, which is where you can see all the backlog of every week's Career Crush series every Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern. And also you can tweet at me, Emily Aries, or at BossedUp.org, which I directly manage, or at Lexs Schroeder. And so we'll be sort of tweeting back and forth at each other. We'll continue to do so. We're already doing so. And I encourage you to weigh in and make sure that this is as applicable to you, and we're answering your questions around women and gender and leadership and parity and whatever you want to ask about, as well as how Lex got to where she is today and how we can do the same. So Lex, how did you find yourself interested in this kind of work, and what led to being a part of Take the Lead?
Yeah, so without going too far back, I said, social justice has always been really important to me. I studied government at Smith. I got a degree in international relations. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. So one thing I just want to sneak in is be open to things that surprise you, right? Like I was dead set on, doing civil rights law, and that was it. And then it turned out that there's lots of different ways to work for justice. So in my 20s, which wasn't that long ago, I worked in publishing and business publishing, nonprofit business publishing, if you can believe there's such a thing that exists. But when you live in Boston and you're close to MIT, there's lots of just brilliant brains thinking about how to do better business and create better businesses that do better by employees. So I worked in business publishing. I had an entrepreneurial startup nonprofit of my own that was dedicated to social justice media. And then I kept getting recognized as a woman leader because of kind of the way that I did my work and the fact that I had an entrepreneurial kind of background. And again, I didn't care so much that I was a woman leader. And then all of a sudden I cared. I was like, well, if I'm going to be recognized, if this is something that's interesting, then I should probably do my reading and brush up on feminist history and women's history and social justice movement history. And that's when I actually read one book among many that informed my next career step. So I read Gloria Felt, the co-president of Take the Lead. I read her book, No Excuses, 9 Ways Women Can Change How We Think About Power, which is just this beautifully researched, whip-smart, kick-ass book that goes beyond saying things are really dire, women are below 20% leadership positions. It's like, what do we do about them? And also it's full of other leader stories in that book. So that brought me to Take the Lead. It was right timing. So another career myth that I'd like to bust is that it's not about getting it right all the time perfectly. There's a lot of luck involved. I happened to be connected to Take the Lead because I read the book and I had mutual colleagues, which was extremely good fortune. Or mutual connections, not even colleagues, but just, what I did do though was I went after it. I went to the organization and I said, this is fantastic work. How can I support? At the time, I was working as a freelance editor with an organization that I'd worked for before. So it's not always easy kind of doing a few different things. We talked about this on the panel at Yale. But the fact that I spent some years freelancing and juggling multiple projects, even though it was really challenging, allowed me to parlay certain things to do other things.
Cool.
So it gives you some freedom.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I feel like in today's day and age, the side hustle is hotter than ever. Everybody's got a side hustle. As an entrepreneur, I feel like everything is a side hustle, right? Yeah. Like just running a business is like 17 different projects being managed, some better than others, at all times. So what do you do to stay sane throughout this process? Like navigating your way from freelance writing and editing to joining a startup, right? A startup nonprofit, but still a startup nonetheless.
Yeah.
Sounds like it could have been a really challenging transition. How do you deal with all that uncertainty, and how can others sort of follow their nose in the right direction?
It's a really good question. And one of the things I appreciate about the questions you ask and about Bossed Up's work is that it is really real and it is really honest. It hasn't always been easy, right? So, you make sure to do your hair and you make sure to show up and put on a smile, because just that alone does so much, right? So, but it's hard. It's very challenging. So this last stage of my career, I moved to New York, not for it, but kind of I moved to New York knowing that my career was headed in the direction of social justice work in New York City. Some people would never do that, right? Like that's not specific. And then my instinct was right. I worked my tail off. And the way that I keep saying is people. So, I listen to a lot of mindfulness podcasts. I'm basically like 60 years old. But in addition to mindfulness podcasts, people, surrounding myself with people who inspire me and who have a lightness and a humor and a joie de vivre and a perspective, right? So I'm very blessed that as a freelancer and as a facilitator in my 20s, I connected with larger networks and made friends who are colleagues who do completely different work, but I can call and be like, listen, this is tricky. Can we think together?
Yes.
And I did the same for them.
I mean, I cannot snap along to what you're saying enough. That stuff, in fact, that community component that you're talking about in this hyper individualistic marketplace that we now find ourselves in, where everyone has their own brand, everyone's got their own side hustle, and it's a real dog-eat-dog world there still, right? Like, we are still coming back from a recession that didn't exactly leave the middle class in too great a position. So I feel like in this environment of hyper individuation, or whatever we want to call it, surrounding yourself with important, inspiring, critical thinkers is so key. It's so key. We put it in the Boston Manifesto, which I'm staring at right now and is behind me as well, in which we say, surround yourself with progress-obsessed, purpose-driven people. Explore and learn with them. And
I would, just to add to that, I love the Boss Up Manifesto. And then on the point of, who to surround yourself with, I would also say, at least for me, what's been valuable is people who value kindness, respect, and grace, right? It's not just about moving forward and productivity. And that's not what Boss Up says. Boss Up actually says, something much more nuanced, which is sustainable careers. So to that point, surround yourself with people who are whole people, not just brains or productivity machines. And I say this as someone who worked in the lean world for a while, so I get the importance of productivity. But you need to surround yourself with people who also lead with grace and with humor and with kindness and respect.
And you said lightness earlier, which I love, and really reminds me of Liz Gilbert's Big Magic. Have you read this?
No, I want to.
Oh my God, you're like preaching from this book already, so you should definitely read it.
I haven't gone to India and had an amazing love affair. That's what I always think of. I have to do that first.
Oh my God. The Eat, Pray, Love thing I take serious beef with, but I did a video on that 2 weeks ago about women in travel. It blew up on LinkedIn, so you got to check that out. But Eat, Pray, Love aside, Liz Gilbert in this book talks about her creative process, essentially. And the biggest thing I took away from it, and, Liz Gilbert is a rad lady who writes a whole bunch of different things that are very different in terms of who likes them, I think. So I was pleasantly surprised by how much I like this, to be honest. And her biggest message was like, can we all just lighten up a little bit? If we're going to be creative thinkers and creators and make big magic happen by creating something new, do we have to stress our way to success? Can we just have a little more dance time and play time? And it just really reminds me of and makes me wonder, what are your playtime? How do you stay light? How do you keep yourself grounded without working all the time, which I know is an anomaly to be in New York City.
I'll be honest, I'm not great at it. So I lived in Boston for 9 years and liked it, never loved it. And now that I'm in New York, I never got the stereotypes about New York, but after being in New York for 3 years, I understand it now. So it's a love-hate relationship, not hate, just love kind of, grown relationship, because it is so work-focused. But for me, it's really about surrounding myself with art. So as a writer and a strategist and a business development person now, I do a lot of work around systems change and working with individuals and organizations to create collective impact. It's heady stuff and it's slow moving some days. So it's like, I just need something that doesn't have to do with words or numbers, and go to a beautiful museum or go take a walk or a hike. And again, go with a friend that inspires you or is hilarious and look up.
I love it. I just went to Chicago for some work with Booth. And what did we do? I brought my man along, and then we tagged along made it into a long weekend and did the Shed Aquarium and went to see art at their amazing fine arts museum there. And I have to say, there's something about animals. We went to the zoo and the aquarium. For me, if it's watching a quick video on Reddit/r/awe, or it's actually seeing animals live, I've decided that that's my new guilty pleasure of mindless joy incarnate. You know what
I
I
was
mean?
gonna laugh. That's a good segue. So if we're really talking about, being whole people and sustainable careers, I don't think it's a coincidence that when I took I'd always had leadership roles in my career, whether editorial leadership roles or with my own startup. But when I chose to work for another organization again and assume a leadership role within that organization, that comes with a whole host of new challenges and opportunities. And right around the same time, I was like, I'm totally getting a dog.
Oh yeah, we've got our we have our puppy disclaimer.
Yeah, it gets you out of your head. You make sure to get out. So I'm not saying everybody go get a dog, but there are a lot of them that need homes. So that's my plug for.
Oh my God. Yeah, I love it. Oh my God. We could seriously get off track here on an animal conversation, but I like getting off track on these conversations anyway. So to bring us back, I'd love to learn more about your editorial experience because I know you're really doing a lot of writing, which is so cool. And I love to write, obviously, talk and YouTube and all kinds of random stuff. What is your process? Like especially for those of us out there who are thinking about starting their own blog or who want to learn from your experience of having a startup, what is that creative process and how do you balance it with the headier stuff and
so that's a really good question. I'll say, so I used to do a lot more writing and then I just recently kind of got back in because when you're building programs, you're doing the heavy lifting of early startup, it is hard to take a break. But I just forced myself to do so recently and it was awesome because you learn so much when you're not writing. So first of all, if you haven't written in a while and you want to, or you've never written and you want to, cut yourself slack and like, who cares? And then just put pen to paper. The other thing I would say is, if you want to be a writer and you're not sure you are a writer, particularly for young women watching this, if you want to write, you are a writer, period. Like, screw the establishment that says you are not. If you have ideas in the world and you are a creative person and you can write, you're a writer. So I have to get that out. But for me, my process, let's see. So I studied under an excellent editor in Boston who had worked for HBR and Inc. and a company that I worked for many years and really learned a ton from the Lean Enterprise Institute. So I studied directly with him. I apprenticed. He was a colleague, but we also shared books all the time on the craft of writing, the craft of editing. That was an enormous learning experience. And then separate from that, in my freelance editorial career and in my facilitation work, I just tried to document things as much as I could. So I'm not a video person like you are so much. Maybe it's because the culture tells me that I have RBF, resting bee face. But in any case, my comfort zone is writing and blogs and articles and op-eds and essays. So the process is simply for me at least, when you have inspiration, when you are totally like clear about something, honor that. And that's when you want to write, catch it in the moment. You don't have to have a journaling practice every morning unless you love that. I personally can't stand that. As long as I'm writing like once every 2 weeks, at least a few pages, I'm good.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And so what is the kind of work that you are most excited about or you've seen sort of create the most amount of change, especially when it comes to your theory of change around big system change when it comes to gender parity? Like, what's working out there? What do you see working out there? Obviously, Bossed Up, we really focus on the individual level and how we can accelerate women, essentially, through our Bossed Up Bootcamp training program to get them after whatever they want to do next with their careers. That's why a lot of folks are tuned in here. But how does system change work? Can you just give us the top sheet on that?
Sure. I wasn't expecting that question, but this is where it's fun doing a few different ththings. It's challenging doing a few different things. But no, what I'll do is I'll point you to one of my favorite short teaches that you can find online on systems change from a mentor, an old past colleague of mine, Deborah Fries out of Boston. She's an incredible woman leader. Again, a leader that happens to be a woman. Who teaches living systems, which is what science and business and the world and nonprofits have learned from nature, which is as one system dies, right? Think of an ecosystem. Let's say there's a swamp that's been, there's some toxic waste in it or something. As one system dies, it's probably a terrible example, but as one system dies, a new system emerges because the earth is really resilient. And how do you create the conditions for organizations and people to be resilient? So the best example, that sounds a little heady, but the best example of that is something called a 2 loops model. 2 as in the number 2, loops as in loop-de-loops. And it talks about how as an old model of anything, right? An old business model, an old belief about yourself, an old community practice that doesn't work anymore, like the super top-down hierarchical model in most cases. If that's dying, then a new loop is emerging. But then you have to find your collaborators on that new loop. Otherwise, it's really scary and it's really lonely, because you're basically looking at like big education, big healthcare, the nonprofit industrial complex, mass incarceration, and you're saying that doesn't work for me, but what is the next system that's going to get me paid and get my colleagues paid and get my family health care and allow me to do a different kind of work that is potentially not currently attached to money and value.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit much, but two loops.
Love it.
Codified by Deborah Fries.
Yeah, Deborah Fries. I've heard her name before too. That whole
Frieze. Frieze.
Cool. And that whole metaphor, which I thought was very eloquently done, thank you, reminds me of this idea that destruction and creation live in the same space. And I find that
crisis and opportunity thing.
Yeah, I find it so true, especially when it comes to personal life, right? Like when a relationship was dying, when I was finding myself so burnt out in a job that I used to love but felt stuck in and exhausted by at that given point in time in my life, with a relationship that was clearly dying but I didn't know how to move on and get out of. That was the moment that set a whole new chapter in my life in motion, and that led to Bossed Up. And I mean, I didn't even have a twinkle in my eye that was Bossed Up at that point. It took years later, 2 years after getting my life together, frankly, and getting bossed up myself and finally feeling like I was in charge of my own life and feeling that sense of agency again.
Yeah.
For me to actually be writing for one of those random every 2 week kind of journal entries and saying, how did this happen? How are the conditions? Like, what are the conditions that led to this transformation, and how do we replicate that? That's how Bossed Up actually started. It was on a journal page, which just blows my mind, right?
And again, that honesty is really courageous. It's really vulnerable. It's not easy. When I was so excited by Bossed Up, I went and took the boot camp, and I was still only a few months out of an abusive relationship myself, right? And I had this big wake-up call, like, how could it happen to me? So without getting into it too much, my pride and my ego was really quite, right? Because I had this, I'm a leader, and I'm this, and I'm that. And the truth is, it happens to women all the time, not just in straight relationships,
Right.
all ages, all class backgrounds, all of this. And there's lots of different kinds of abuse.
Yes.
And the fact that you were open about that, leading a Bossed Up training, like that's not a small thing, so thank you for that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I have to say, I've learned from the best, right? I've been privy to lots of amazing, authentic leadership myself. And what I found is that it's fucking scary, first of all. And second of all, it's also that which fuels connection and actually makes this whole thing tick.
Yeah.
And today, I'm so glad you went there too, because I didn't even realize this coincidence, but today's video that we just put out is all about toxic relationships and acknowledging that not just are they bad for you personally, they also can really hamper your ability to reach your full potential in your career. So for anyone who might be facing that kind of a situation, or is feeling torn, or feeling like my relationship is messed up but it has no impact on my job, think again and tune in and watch that today.
And ask for help. Just ask for help, because people love you and are around you and want to help. And you didn't ask for anything crazy and abusive.
Right. So I have to ask you, Lex, you've done such incredible, varied work over the years. What has been some of the challenges you faced along the way, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah. So I made a little list.
And I was like, oh wait, this is a question she's waiting for, right?
So many challenges, and there can be opportunities. But no, it really is in retrospect that you look back and you kind of want to give yourself, an atta girl, because in the moment it's quite challenging. And depending on where you are and your age and how connected you feel or not to your colleagues, it's challenging. So I did make a list because there are a few. But the first challenge that I encountered that I just want to make sure to name is, and I'll write about this someday, but I feel like some of the best minds of our generation, who's the original? I have to look up the original on that one, but the best minds of my generation, at least the women, are getting relegated to admin assistant roles. And there is nothing wrong, I want to say, with being an administrative assistant if you like that, because some people really like that role and are good at it, and then they can kind of put the office management away and go home and do something else. But if if you have bigger aims and you have the experience and the degree to go be bigger, don't ever let anybody put you in an admin assistant role. So, and that didn't even happen to me a lot, but when I was out of college, it did a tiny bit. I was shocked that in Boston, with a degree from Smith and my GPA and my connections, that is where I had to start. So first challenge, I didn't let myself be relegated to an admin assistant. I asked for everything, and then within 3 years, I edited a book. So ask for what you want. Ask for what you want. Another challenge is starting a business and navigating that world while trying to change the way business gets done. So, oh, and the volume just went out on you, which is weird. Okay, so
I was just saying, oh my God, yes, while I was muted.
I got it.
Like, yeah, I just wanted to give you that snaps along there.
So don't let anybody say you don't understand how it works, or no, this is the way grants are done, period. You can't change that. You have to know how to play with the existing system, but you also have to be creative and resilient and figure out different ways of getting things done. So, you know, I'm sorry, but no one can preach to me about the be all and end all of traditional business strategy when it is so dominated by men. And we know that it's something disgusting, like under 3 or under 7% of all venture capital goes to women-led startups, right? So look at the people who are changing the game, like Pipeline Fellows, Natalia Bertina Guerra and her incredible team. So Springboard Enterprises, a colleague of mine, Stephanie Goodell out of Boston. Look at people who are changing the game and challenge yourself to forge a new path while you learn how to play and be resilient in the existing business world. So that was a challenge. Do you have time for any more?
I love that. Yeah, please keep. I'm just like tweeting away over here. I love what you're saying. And you know what? Actually, can we pause there on the business front, because we get so many women who come to Bossed Up Bootcamp or involved in our online communities. My dog's gonna make himself known here in a second, but who are saying, yes, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to ask for what I want. I'm going to start a business. I bootstrapped Bossed Up, right? Because quite frankly, the VC chase was not one that I wanted to do and just wasn't appealing to me, even though I did make a good effort. Tell us more about how people like Pipeline Fellows are changing that game and what that actually looks like if you are a woman who wants to start a business. What's maybe the first couple steps that you would recommend them taking?
So, okay, that feels like 2 questions, but it's good to stop here. And I am going to do a take the lead plug here because it's highly relevant.
Totally.
First, I think you need to examine your own relationship to kind of owning your work and owning who you are and owning what you want to do and owning what you know you can do. And so at Take the Lead, what we teach is that it's not about, not to at all shame the word, but it's not about empowering others, right? It's about respecting the power that every individual has. And as a social justice practitioner, that's really important to me, because if someone told me I, Lex, need to be empowered, as a queer working class kid with an alternative family, I would say, you're not my friend. I have power. You don't know anything about my life. So anyway, so we believe strongly in respecting the power that everybody has, allowing for all of that difference, and then how do you use your power effectively? And so I'll get to the business point in a minute, but that's why we teach real principles for change. Like, you got to be clear on what you want and know that you deserve it and have a cohesive story for advocating for yourself before you can go out there and try to raise capital or any of those things. So that might be as simple as reading a book. It might be as simple as going, if you have the funds in your company, Take the Lead in. We can help your women entrepreneurs and your women leaders do that. If there's a new initiative in the company that you want to start, we work inside and outside organizations. And then when it comes to the question of, okay, so other first steps, and then I'll talk about how some of the leaders are changing the game. Other first steps, I can't say it enough, find your collaborators. So this is, I don't think social media is like the best thing since sliced bread, but it's pretty great because it allows you to connect with people who are thinking and making the same connections that you're making. So for me, as a young woman entrepreneur and leader and writer who kind of identifies with a strong personal brand in addition to working in an organization, that was invaluable, because if I had colleagues that were like, who does she think she is? Which was always, it's fine, people can do that. You find people who have always acted as independent actors and freelancers as well, and you don't feel so crazy. But we don't talk a lot about that, or we don't talk a lot about how women opt out of so many companies or try so hard for that side hustle because their day job just simply doesn't work for them, and they know that they're hitting a brick wall. So I'm not advocating that you leave your organization necessarily if you have a day job, but whatever your work scenario is, find your collaborators so that you see yourself in the field. So like,
Yeah.
put yourself out there. And then lastly, just to answer your question about, how are people changing the game? I always talk about pipeline fellows. I interviewed Natalia Bertina-Guerra years ago with my social justice nonprofit startup, the New Prosperity Initiative. And then I've watched this organization grow. And there's an incredible NPR article interview with Natalia Bertina-Guerra where she talks about how implicit bias and the fact that dominant groups who don't know they're dominant, they can't see what they can't see. So white men fund handsome white men. It's hilarious. For the most part, that's what happens.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's so ridiculous that you can't even, it's not malicious if the dominant group doesn't know that it's dominant. So Pipeline Fellows trains women and women of color angel investors to support women-led for-profit social ventures.
Very cool.
So they're just phenomenal.
I love it. So we've got time for one more comment. So tell us about that last or other top challenge you faced and how you overcame it. And then where else we can catch up with you, Lex, and how we can be some collaborators with you. I
think the last thing I'll say, because I've been thinking more about being yourself at work lately is, it's, if I'm really honest, it's not always always easy to be vulnerable. So, I mean, there's so much talk, right, of power in the women's leadership community, of authenticity, but I've taught a lot about how asking women to be authentic without creating, it's beyond safe spaces, but without creating community around it, the way Boss Up does. If you ask people to be authentic without creating authentic community around it, it doesn't feel safe, even if it is.
Right.
Because if you're anything other than the dominant whatever.
Yeah.
So for me, as a queer woman, as a woman with young woman with an alternative family, those are actually hard things. I could care less if someone thinks, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, if someone thought I was too young to be an entrepreneur. That never fazed me. But showing up with other parts of myself, my class background, things like that, we don't talk a lot about that. And there's a lot of shame, and it's really silly because so many people tuning in, it's like you're so knowledgeable and you are so well trained and you have so many great ideas, and all you got to do is trust that and not let the world's messages get in your head too much. So I would say showing up vulnerable isn't always easy.
Yeah, I love that. And I think Brene Brown is the queen of vulnerability, right? Like she's got a monopoly on the conversation because of how great her TED Talk was on this very subject matter. But I'm also just reminded of diversity matters, right? Diversity makes us stronger, and that's not just true in the working world, it's true in the feminist movement as well. We know that feminism can look like white, rich feminism often, and white, rich, straight, privileged feminism. I mean, the list goes on, right?
And we make a lot of assumptions about each other. That just to interrupt, but I mean, even around that, right? Like,
totally.
It's fascinating when people think of me as a privileged straight lady. I'm like, that's hilarious.
And also, I love what you're saying around the changing nature of family. And I just have to point out one of my amazing advisors on the Boston Advisory Board, Nicole Rogers, has an initiative, an amazing organization that she started called the Family Story Project, about how we're changing the narrative around what families look like and how important it is that we acknowledge that in the state of our policy making bodies and beyond. So we should definitely check that out, and let's all be collaborators in this process. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lex, and thank you to those who've tuned in. Where can we find out more about Take the Lead and Lex? Where else can we catch you? Obviously, we're all tweeting at you, but what's your last words?
Yeah, well, no, this was fabulous. It's always interesting to have a well-rounded conversation, so thank you for hosting it so beautifully. I think my last thought is, a women's leadership movement can't happen without some knowledge of systems. And so I'm going to just be a teacher on that point at this point. Please do your research on systems change. Please go out there and work across organizations, not just within your own organization. So come talk to us at Take the Lead. Visit us at taketheleadwomen.com. And I gotta recommend Gloria Feldt's book, the book that started this part of my career for me, No Excuses, 9 Ways Women Can Think About Power, can change how we think about power. And my website is lexschroeder.com.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your many multi-talented phases in your career. It's so exciting and inspiring to hear from boss women like you. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll keep this conversation going, so if you're watching this way after the fact on our YouTube channel, you're still in the right place, and Lex and I love tweeting at you anytime. So give us a shout at Lexs Schroeder or at BossedUpORG, and just use that hashtag CareerCrush so we can keep track of today's conversation. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe now to Bossed Up's YouTube channel. There should be a subscribe button in the top that area of your screen right now, or if not, click the little YouTube logo down there and you'll be taken to our channel where we put out new content every week, including wonderful interviews with boss women who I have a career crush on every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you next time.